Happy holidays, everyone, and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host, as always, Carson Timar, and today we have a full house as I'm joined by Nicolò Grasso, Jak-Luke Sharp, and special guest Ivan as we conclude David Lynch December with our review of Inland Empire. This is definitely a daunting film to break down. Just to be very transparent, this was my first time seeing the film, so definitely there's a lot to get into, a lot to digest, and we have a little bit of a longer episode for you today as we really get into our thoughts on the film, our interpretations of the film, and conclude the month by celebrating and acknowledging all the work and uniqueness that comes with David Lynch's career. I think this is a very fun, a very worthy episode, and it's one that I love to conclude our 2024. It is the last podcast of the year, and I'm so excited that you're here to celebrate with us. So without further ado, because we do have a longer episode today, let's just get right into our review of Inland Empire. So this is probably going to be a bit of a challenging episode to get through in some ways. Definitely an interesting conversation we're going to have tonight. Nick, I think as the guru of Lynch on the podcast, this was you named once your favorite film of all time. I would love to maybe you start out with your opening thoughts on Inland Empire. A strange conversation to start out with, but I think you're probably the most qualified to start it. So go and take it away. What are your thoughts on Inland Empire?
Oh boy, that's a lot of pressure. I'll try to do my best because so far we talked about Blue Velvet, which is, I would say, fairly accessible. It's actually an amazing film. Love it to bits. Lost Highway, it's a bit thornier. It's a bit more complex, way darker as well. Inland Empire, I think, is genuinely one of those films that you cannot watch if you don't have a little bit of context as to why the film was made, how the film was made. Because the first time I watched this was back in, I want to say, like 2018 for October, probably my last feature by Lynch or close to it. And I didn't really like it because I didn't have any of the context around it. I was just like, oh, 3-hour horror film by Lynch, sure, why not? And I was presented with what is basically one of the most fascinating works of art I've ever seen, especially works of visual medium in the digital era. The fact that Inland Empire is an examination of cinema stripped down to its most basic forms, tackling fame, tackling death, your impending inevitable demise. It's incredibly harrowing, it's incredibly disturbing, and also it's just pure nightmare in a way that I find incredibly inspiring. Because so often, you see people and you hear them like, oh yeah, you can just pick up a camera and shoot a movie. But then everyone's always thinking about like, I need the cinematic lenses, I need like the super big camera, 50 people crew. And here comes Lynch, 60 years old, more or less, who's just like, nah, man, you don't need that. You need a simple, tiny ass 480p camera with a mountain topped microphone on it, and just like follow your heart, follow your creativity. And in the span of, I think, like 3-4 years, he ended up shooting the entirety of Inland Empire. He found some sort of cohesive way of putting it all together. And rewatching it now for the fourth time, fifth time, I really, really love this film as a work of art, as just a sensorial experience. This is not one of those, even, like talked about Lost Highway. We all know about Mulholland Drive. Like those are movies that are complicated, that have those interwoven narratives that don't always make complete sense in the logical meaning of it. Inland Empire works exclusively on an abstract, intuitive level. It's a movie you have to feel more than you have to think about. And I think that's something that I've grown to really, really appreciate, not just watching cinema, but experiencing art in general. Who made the rules? Literally, no one made the rules. We are imposing rules on how movies and stories should be told. And I love that Lynch just like threw all out the window and decided, I'm just going to spend, weeks shooting with Laura Dern, some good friends, having a good time, and then just scaring the shit out of you. that's that's Inland Empire in a nutshell for me.
Ivan, I believe you're also a pretty big fan of the film, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a fan of Lynch since I was a kid, and since I watched Twin Peaks pilot, and I think I was hooked for life. I was 10 years old at that time, and I remember first time seeing the Red Room, and I was just like, "What the hell? Like you can do this like on a screen in a movie?" It was just like nothing else I've ever seen, and it just been like a lifelong obsession with me. And uh, Inland Empire is a tough movie. I just want to thank you guys for inviting me to talk about the most difficult movie there is to talk about in the history of cinema, probably. Of course, this is the one I'm gonna get, but I do appreciate the challenge. I think it's a really interesting movie to think about. It's not a kind of movie that you can just watch once or even twice and just be like, okay, that's it. To me, I feel like this movie is like a painting, really, because I just went to a couple of museums this weekend, and when I look at a painting, you're always thinking about how do you connect with it? Like, what do you feel about it? It's very rarely, at least for me, that I look at a painting and think like, well, what is the artist trying to say with this painting? It's very rarely that I do that. And sometimes, you'll have the explanation there, sometimes you won't. But to me, like my first intuitive thinking is like, do I connect with it? How do I feel about it? And with Lynch, it's like there's always like two ways that you can watch his work, and either you can watch it and just let it kind of wash over you and just feel it, and like how does it make you feel, just think about the experience, the atmosphere, the mood, the vibes, however you want to look at it. Or you can try to figure out what it all means. And I feel like if you're doing this the first time you're watching, especially in Land Empire, you're going to have a bad time. I think maybe leave that for later if you really want to think about that, if it's even really important in this case. But like to me, I love it. I love it for its imagination, for dream logic, for how wild and imaginative and unpredictable it is. And it's like you really do not know where this movie is going when you see it for the first time. It's like what the Showtime boss said, pure heroin Lynch. I think this is it. And it just to me, even though you could say like it's a very ugly looking film, I think that's we all know that but I think there's actually some great stuff about that because um you know it's like I always think about it, it's like something you shouldn't be watching. That's how I feel. It's like looks grimy, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Like it looks like you can't all see it clearly. It kind of feels hallucinogenic. It's like leaving more room to dream that Lynch always talks about. And to me, it's but it still has a lot of really memorable moments and images, and Laura Dern, who acts like her life depends on it. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot about her because she really is the heart and soul of this film. But I think I do love that about the movie, that it just kind of puts you in this like world that is unlike any other filmmakers. It's like a movie. You could say, some people will say, oh, especially people who won't like maybe the movie will feel, oh, this is like a most expensive student film ever made. But I don't think anybody else could have made a film like this. I think this is something uniquely, Lynchian, let's use that used up term. But it really is like a movie that nobody else could have made. And I think that's why I love it.
So this is where I guess I'll jump in because I think we're going to go down the line here. I saw this film the first time yesterday, which is probably not the best way, as you mentioned, to then talk about the film. And I don't think there's ever been a time on the show, in the history of the show, and the now over 200 episodes of the show, that I've been so conflicted about a project. Because on one hand, there's a lot here I genuinely love. I've had a great David Lynch December when it comes to falling in love with David Lynch as a filmmaker. I love the digital cinematography here. I love the ideals of the filmmaker, of him just wanting to show that you don't need this big camera. You can just take this little digital camera and go shoot a movie. I love the ideals there. I think Laura Dern is excellent here. I think she really is magnificent as a performer. There's a lot about this film on a core level, on an idea level, that I appreciate. It doesn't change the fact that when watching this, I found it to be like excruciating to get through. I appreciate that David Lynch, I don't know if I appreciate, I respect, I guess rather, that David Lynch just started filming these scenes and then working out how to put them together and trying to put together this patchwork of ideas to try to make something bigger. And I really don't think it's necessarily even like impossible on a first viewing to start getting takeaways and start getting interpretations and meanings. I think especially when it comes to identity and performance on the camera. And maybe this has actually even benefited somewhat from our conversation on Oh Canada, Nick, where we talked about what a identity on screen means. I think that's all there, and you can start to engage with that very clearly, even though there's obviously a lot more going on here. The issue is it was so fucking boring for 3 hours long with no direction, with barely any characters, no even resemblance of characters. You're just watching random artistic scenes, which is fine, but it doesn't create a compelling experience for me to sit down and watch. If this was like a museum exhibition that was just playing on a loop in a museum and you can go watch 15 minutes, then walk away, maybe come back later and watch some more, I think I would really love it then. As a viewing experience, just as a film, I don't know if I could sit through this again just in one go. It really, to me, felt just excruciating, even if I respect a lot of the ideas behind it. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, I don't think Lynch is coming into Inland Empire to make like a narrative clean feature. I think he's doing an experiment here. And with experiments, you get some good, you get some bad. You get interesting results to say the least. But I'm definitely not going to be the most positive. But I also, again, respect a lot of what is behind this. And I definitely would not throw this away as being like trash. I think there is something here, especially on a filmmaking level, that's interesting. But overall, not quite sure, at least on a first viewing, this is for me. Jack, what are your thoughts on Inland Empire?
I'm glad I'm going last because this is going to be more so a therapy session for me, not an educational session. More so because I'm really glad there's two people here that adore this, and there's someone in the middle, and then I'm probably far more pushed away than probably Carson is. My relationship with David Lynch probably goes back to when I was 16. I remember being in college and we had a tutor come in for about 2 weeks, and he like screened a Razorhead. I never seen anything like that. I grew up on the Wachowskis. I grew up on 90s cinema, very much into the Scorsese at the time, very much getting into like Kubrick at the time. And being screened a Razorhead with a group of 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds who were sort of formulating opinions on the identity of what cinema is and so on and so forth. It's quite a massive awakening for me. And watching that screening and having a discussion afterwards, me telling him what the film I thought was about, and then him telling me what it was about, and then listening to Lynch sort of adamantly refuse to say what it was about, has always stuck into my mind. And then since then has grown into like Lost Highway is one of my favorite. I think it's one of my favorite films of his. I mean, I haven't seen The Straight Story, but I think The Elephant Man is a masterpiece. And there's other stuff there, like Blue Velvet, I think is good. I think Wild at Heart is very good. Mulholland Drive, or Mulholland, I can never pronounce it. You could, Carson, you're a States person, come on.
Mulholland.
Mulholland.
Yes.
That's a dropping me there, yeah. I think that's got more to do with this than anyone's actually sort of stated before. From what I've done on my readings on Letterboxd and so on and so forth. It'd be interesting to talk about that. But I think the crux of the issues comes from that film. But getting back to Inland Empire, I thought this is excruciating for me. This is 3 hours of an abstract filmmaker formulating the abstract in the moment. And I think with cinema, that's a very difficult thing, if not neon impossible to do. He probably just about gets away with it solely in the fact that he can sort of have this rambling of interconnected thoughts, dreamlike sequences, life, fiction meeting non-fiction. Lynch's sort of abstract allows him to get away with that. If this came from any other filmmaker, I think we'd have a very different sort of appreciation for it. Nevertheless, I'd sort of disagree with Carson's assessment where I don't think 3 hours of this are difficult. Once it gets over the film within a film and we have the first sort of therapy session, I'm like, oh wow, here we go. And for that hour in the middle, I'm like, oh, this is very interesting. And it's the same thing repeated. And that last hour for me is probably the worst I've seen from David Lynch. I think that where I come down on this quite bluntly is that this is a director who has gone in with a vision very clouded, but has no idea what he's going to do. And these are a series of vignettes or a series of experiments that he's tried to stitch together. And you can tell, I think it's so abundantly clear that this is not a Lynch feature where you go from Blue Velvet, where there's a person behind in principal photographer, or even in a pre-production, who has this idea where it all gels, or there's this um, this idea where you can see start to end. I think this is really dangerous for someone who's experimental, because where does it end? I think you can do experimental theatre, you can get experimental cinema, but I think when you do something for 3 hours, I think it grates on the audience, I think it grates on the narrative, and I think it actually grates on the experience itself. There's a reason why experimental cinema is always like a really great 10, 20, 30 minutes long, because I think you've really got to push the idea of the abstract to the audience. And here, I just think it goes on and 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 on. And there's stuff from the early 2000s in here that's put in with the rabbits. There's the Asian girl that she's in one of his shots as well. That's got something to do with this. It's all just preambling to me. It's all just like here, there, and everywhere. And to put it very bluntly, I feel like this is a problem with Mulholland Drive. I think this is the idea of making a pilot for 90 minutes, it failing, and then just building on from the 90 minutes to something that's 2.5 hours, 2:45. I think he had sort of the same idea to try and do that to this, where, well, we don't have 90 minutes, we have 15, but let's just blossom it. But I think the problem with that is that you already had a good 90 minutes. You had an A, B, and a C. You had a beginning, a middle, and end. I think with Inland Empire, of how he's done his vignettes here, or at least of his experiment, he hasn't got the basic beginning, middle, and end. I think it all just sort of just piles together. Is this concoction of just mumble, like a visual mumble. I can understand why Nick loves this. I'm so excited to know what Ivan's thoughts about Lynch's throughout his career, because I think it's going to be really interesting to talk about. But I can understand why he's not made a film since. And I can understand why people rejected this. I can understand why Studio Canal is the only person to touch this. I can understand why promotional material could not be cut for it, because there's just how do you sell this? I think that there's a lot here where, if you've got Laura Dern and you've got Justin Theroux saying we have got no idea what this is about, I think that's an indictment of the project, not necessarily a positive, because I think that comes across in its material as well. I think you talk about lack of direction here. It's like from the same person who made for 4 years earlier, scary, going through that cafe, that diner. That's scary. This is just frightening on a different level, I suppose. But I'll let the room talk. I'll get back into the lodge, if you will. But yeah, I hope this is going to be positive.
I have some some remarks on that. No, I totally get it. I kind of expected this outcome, to be honest. But I think what I find interesting, the way you put it, Jack, is that it's almost like painting it in a way that it's almost like Lynch wanted those things. Like Lynch almost like made the movie wanting it to be a feature film. He made the movie wanting it to be this, not commercial or critical success, but kind of like meant for an audience or something like that. But it never really was like that. It never really even was that confused in a way that seems just random. That's just feels very, as someone who's also made a couple of films that are more just, I'm gonna feel my vibes with this. It doesn't mean there's lack of direction. I never really feel it watching this. It's actually, especially on rewatches, which I think is something that's really, really important to take into account here, because both me and Ivan have seen it multiple times over the past years for me, and even longer for you. And for both of you, it's just the first watching. Like, I think if this were my first time watching the movie, I would most likely be, like, if you talk to 2018 Nick watching this film, I would be in the same camp as Carson, to be honest. Kind of like, I didn't really get it. Like, I found this to be boring. I found it to be painful. It takes so long to get anywhere. But just like speaking personally, at least for me, there has been this growing interest in just the experimental and the abstract, but not in the way of just, oh, I do something random and pretend it has any meaning, but to actually let the person watching it find meaning for themselves. I think there's something very powerful in having a mirror presented to you and looking into yourself and how you and what you see reflected in front of you. And that's what I find very compelling about Inland Empire. Even my second viewing, which is when I actually fell in love with this film, I would never forget. I had a fever. I had been meaning to rewatch the movie for like a couple of years, and I was like, I think I didn't really get it. Like something wasn't there for me the first time around. And then I had this fever. I was like sick. I was feeling so terrible, and for some reason I thought this is a great time to rewatch Inland Empire. Let's do this, baby. It was like 10 p.m. Headphones on. Room was dark. I was sweating bullets, and it was truly a transcendent experience. This is a movie that, like you said, Ivan, earlier, like it is. I do think this more so than other films of Lynch. You have to feel it first before fully trying to get it, if you even have to get it. Um, I think Lynch hasn't made a film yet, mainly because he didn't really want to keep making films. Even throughout Mulholland Drive and the Inland Empire, he made a shit ton of commercials, of shorts, of small, tiny documentaries of people on boats, just like having fun. And even listening to interviews with him, yeah, Lost Highway, the Straight Story, like all those movies, he loved making them, but he was missing the purity of the paintings that he used to make. He was missing that freedom that he could just I want to make something, I go out and make it. I don't need the money, man. I don't need all of those like fucking 2 months in pre-production. That's something that you can see clearly in the making of Twin Peaks: The Return, which is outstanding. And you see him just like struggling with going back into this routine. I want to get dreamy. That's what he says. Like, we don't have time to get dreamy in this place. We only are here for 2 days. I want time to spend there. And in this film, you get pure dreaminess, the room to dream that Ivan mentioned. It's here. It's this film, which again means it's not accessible in a way that's not even a criticism for being like, oh, if you watch it and you don't like it, it's boring, it's long, it's tiring. 100% I get it. I don't hold it against anyone for not liking this film. I think it's definitely something that needs to be felt more, in a way. I don't know if it makes sense. It's very rambly, like the movie itself, in a way. I don't know if Ivan, you have something you wanted to add about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's really well said, and I think it's really interesting to look at this movie in tandem with The Razorhead, his first movie, because they were both made over a period of years. Lynch was it's kind of a DIY movie. Actually, I wrote this down. So for Inland Empire, he's credited obviously director, writer, producer, co-editor, camera operator, co-composer, re-recording mixer, sound designer, and even part of the art department. I mean, it's astounding, And to me, it really goes. Eraserhead probably had even more credits, but it's kind of very intuitive filmmaking, very experimental filmmaking, very freeing, as you were saying. And I think it actually really goes well. I don't want to say this is the reason why this is his last feature film to date, but they work so well, these two movies in tandem, that I think is really interesting to look at them and compare and contrast them, because they do have a lot in common, even though Eraserhead did have a script to begin with, but that script was like, I don't know, like 20, 30 pages, and
Yeah,
it
something
turned
like
out to
that.
be and people say like Inland Empire didn't have a finished script. It didn't have a finished script, but the script was written piecemeal. So it was just written over a period of time, but it was written. It wasn't an improvised kind of thing. Everything was written. Everything was specific. But what Jack was saying, the kind of putting these vignettes together, I think that's a feature. That's not a bug. And to me, I think that's what makes it really fascinating, how it all fits together, or does it all fit together? Because a lot of things start appearing and reappearing, and then you see, Fia Zeben that shows up on the door of the rabbits in the end, and the gun that's given to Piotrek, or the character in Poland shows up in the drawer that Laura Dern's character, whoever she's playing at that point, finds. So it's like things do somehow connect. Whether, again, I absolutely understand why this movie wouldn't work for everyone. I love Lost Highway. I love Mulholland Drive. Fire Walk with Me is my favorite film of his. But I think it kind of stands out because of these things. What I really love about this movie is this kind of dream logic is always talked about. But when I say that, what I really mean is like, and I think we've all had these kind of experiences where you have a dream and this is you, but it doesn't look like you, but it's you. And you're in your home, but your home doesn't look like your home, but it's your home. That kind of feeling. And I think out of any movie that I've ever seen, this presents that kind of feeling the best, because you can't explain it in any other way. It's like it's exactly that. Like, I know this is me, but it looks like, I don't know, Chris Rock or something, but I know it's me, and that kind of thing. And it's like, and you're in a palace, but no, this is my bedroom actually. And I think that he is able to translate these kind of feelings and put them on film or digital video in this case, more successfully than any other filmmaker. And another thing I just want to say, Jack, this thing that Justin Theroux and Laura Dern didn't know what was going on. Again, to me, that is a feature, not a bug, because as an actor, I'm not an actor by any means, but I did take some acting workshops with Cheryl Lee back when I was in the States. And the most important thing about acting is being present in the moment. That really is the key to acting. Like, you cannot be thinking about, anything other than this moment. It's like, and what they probably didn't have on this film, they're like, okay, what was my scene before, what is going to be my next scene? They did not have that. But I think that makes actually the art of acting even more valuable and more important and more powerful, because it's like it's distilled to the purest essence of acting. It's that being present in the moment. And to me, I think that's why especially Laura's performance resonates that well, because it is just being in that moment. And I think that's why it's so successful. I can absolutely understand why people would not connect with this film. But to me, I always go back to Laura Dern, because she's the heart of this film. And I always, even when the movie starts to become overwhelming or too incomprehensible or impenetrable, I always like, oh, okay, I got Laura Dern here. She's gonna, take me by the hand and it's gonna be okay. And I just want to, I remembered, I didn't explain the way I first saw this movie was at New York Film Festival. I was living in New York back then, and it was like a Monday screening. It was not the first screening, it was the second screening. And what do you know? Laura Dern, Justin Theroux, and David Lynch show up for a QA afterwards, and they spend like an hour signing things, and I get to meet David Lynch, I get to meet Laura Dern, and it's like I have this amazing experience. And then like a couple of months later, there was a screening at IFC Center of Vertigo, and Lynch was doing an introduction to it. And so when he finished the spiel, how much he loves Vertigo, blah, blah. And then he says, does anybody have any questions? And everybody's silent. The whole room is silent. They're all like too nervous. And I'm like, oh no, he's going to leave. And he's like, okay, well, since nobody's got any question, enjoy Vertigo. And I'm like, wait, why did you decide to distribute Inland Empire yourself? And he says, because it's a 3-hour movie that nobody understands. And the whole room erupts into laughter, and then the questions start, and so that I always remember that. So clearly he was very aware of the kind of movie he was making and the kind of potential reaction he might be getting out of people. So it's definitely not a surprise for him. I think he was definitely very, very aware of that.
Well, I'll also throw in there that if you have the I just recommend that Nick was the one who recommended this to me. If you have the Criterion version, you have the Criterion channel. There's like a 30-minute conversation with Laura Dern where she reflects on the making of the film. And I do think there are points where like you have to argue correlation versus causation, but there are times where her character especially is going through an identity crisis, right? Where she doesn't know who she is, why she is where she is. So not giving the actors that context also, I think, can play well as far as generating that emotion. Again, is that the genius of Lynch, or is it just how he was writing the film? Who knows? But it is something that you could argue. But what were you going to say, Jack?
I was just going to say, I'll concede the performance. I think Laura Dern here is magical. I think without a strong performance here, centrally, who has to balance the sheer emotional torment, I think externally, I think internally, especially what you're saying about how she's present, and obviously she doesn't have the full idea of what this scope is going to be. She's just doing the sequence itself. I think she's genuinely magical. I think everything else surrounding it lacks not necessarily substance, but sort of like this emotional immersion, because it's so like lacking in terms of like structure, and because you've got to sort of put it all together like this massive jigsaw out of place, out of puzzle. I think it's very difficult to sort of connect outside of her. I think that more credit to performance engaging the audience there, but I think it goes back to the Lynch thing, how long you can sustain his operandi, because there's an interesting thing with Lynch's in his career where when you move on from Eraserhead, he sort of gets bigger, more interesting. His budget's increased, but he sort of keeps the abstract, the experimental, but he gets the form. He understands that he gets structure, everything's there. But he does little twists and turns. I think Twin Peaks is a great example of that. It's a 21 episode season, season 2 anyway, and you get structure there. You get this massive long form content, and you've got the soap operatic melancholy, all that sort of shit in it. But you've also got the massive brushes of Lynchian stuff in there. I think Wild at Heart is a perfect example. I think Lost Highway. I think Straight Story Elephant Man, we got to discount them. I think Eraserhead especially. But it's interesting, after a Lost Highway, I think there's something happens with Lynch. I don't know if it's past the straight story or not. We just have to discount that for the sake of this argument. But I think something happens after Lost Highway. I think after Twin Peaks season 2 gets canned, I just think something changes in him. I think he loses the idea of. I think it's either corporate or commercialism becomes far too indulgent of who his partners are with, and I think his artistic expression, I think, while never limited, because that's so unfair to say that he's never been able to express himself to the full extent. He always has done, and he always still could do. If he wants to go out and get a Sony XR1 or whatever it is, or whatever he wants to do with 35mm, he's fully able to do that. Granted, health certain limitations now, of course, but for the last decade or 20 years, bar again the return, he's always had the option to go out and shoot on a very limited budget and still get the expression out. So I don't really buy into that. But I think that he felt, and again, I'm speaking for a man I don't know here, but I can look at these films, I can do enough research on it. I think he comes to a point where I think he feels that the idea of people finding his work through video or word of mouth is far more engaging than it is the idea of lynching. And I think that's the thing that probably was the worst thing that probably could happen to him. Because I remember when you find Eraserhead, if thank God anyone finds that first, I think you always should do. There's an interesting aspect to that where it's like, what the I know, sorry, pardon my French, what the fuck is this? What was going through his mind? And then you realise he had two kids. His daughter was just being born. He lived in Missoula, Montana, like in very much an idyllic lifespan. And it's like, what is making that? He's a very, very mundane, very stoic man, right? Who's got a very engaging iconographer, but he's very much a casual Joe. He likes eating at Denny's. It's very strange to get that dissonance. And I think what happened to him was the idea of that in the 90s, after Twin Peaks, I think he blew up to a point where Lynchian took off. I think a genre sort of took off. The 90s exploded. And I just don't think he was probably in an idea of engaging with the commercialism there. And also, I think he probably would have thought he was selling out. I think he probably does so. But then again, he goes back with the Mulholland Drive thing. I go back to that. And I think he just rests on the same narrative. Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, and this. They're a strange trilogy of a woman who was a double character. His male performances in there are an interesting aspect to it, although he does change them to the antagonist as well. But it's just an interesting one where, like, with this, there's 2 quarters. This one, this is very experimental. I'm fine. I know I'm waffling here, but please indulge me. I was like, this is quite interesting. And then you get the choice, and I'm not going to lie. After the 2 hours, I thought, I don't think you've got any idea how you're going to balance this. I don't think you have any idea how you're going to land this plane. And I think you're just going to rest on the ideas of what you've done before, which is Mulholland Drive. And I really do. I know that might be speaking out of turn, though. I really do get the impression that, like, he's just very much on autopilot with this. And that sounds really silly to say, considering it's a 3-hour film. of him experimenting with the digital format. And I think, and again, that might sound somewhat contradictory, but I find thematically he's doing the same thing, yet visually and aesthetically he's changing it up. I don't find that to be any way engaging to the likes of watching a director who went from Lost Highway to The Straight Story. I don't find that as engaging as watching someone go from Eraserhead to making Twin Peaks. And I even do, even to that extent, I don't find that as engaging as watching someone go from Dune to Blue Velvet. From 97 to 2005, I don't think he ever made the next push. And I think with The Return, as much as I'm gonna hit, the people are gonna start really hating me here. I don't think that was a wise decision to do either, because I think that goes back to the well. I think finishing something he should have done 20 to 30 years ago with Showtime, which granted give him the budget, which he wasn't going to do at first. It was very much publicised. He went back to the well. Still didn't want to end it. Still couldn't find finality, but granted that series doesn't allow it to anywhere. So I fully respect that. But I just think that cinematically or even thematically, or however you want to put it, I don't think he took that next step to just do something again radical. I think with digitalization in the early 2000s, this just wasn't the answer. I think when you've got Lucas at the same time pushing digital in 2002, and you get Danny Boyle doing it in 2002 as well, 3 years later for a David Lynch experiment film to be 3 hours long, I think this very much is solely for the diehards. And I don't knock that, but to me, to get back to the point, I just don't see a big enough push of like David Lynch doing something like after Mulholland Drive. You know, you've it's on. This career is like burning with passion now, and 3 years later to do this, it feels like very much anti-establishment in a way. And I might be reading into it, but to me, maybe Nick's right. Maybe it's like, well, maybe he just didn't want to make films anymore, and maybe that's anti-abstract in a format of doing it like this. But that sort of breaks my heart in a way. Like I don't. It's like if you ever said to me, Nick, I don't want to make movies anymore. Like you're on this planet to make movies. Like what you gonna do? Like this, you're on the planet to make movies. David Lynch is on this planet to make abstract experiment cinema. For him to just sort of call it a day, I don't know. Maybe you two can explain it more a bit than I can. But that's the impression I get. Maybe I'm talking about my ass there, but that's the sort of impression I get.
Oh, I got what you mean, and like it's not like he didn't want to keep making movies, and that's it. Like he still tried and still tries. I think he tried with Netflix, if I'm not mistaken, for both like a TV show. Wisteria was something that was supposed to come out and then just went nowhere, and then also an animated film. They completely canceled it. So the interest in doing it was present, but I think what you said earlier is spot on. That with the failure of both getting Twin Peaks renewed and getting people to actually like and get Fire Walk with Me. Everyone just wanted like, oh, I want to keep continuation, keep moving forward. And it was like, no, I really care about this tragedy, the great American tragedy of Laura Palmer. Let's focus on this for a second before we keep going forward. And people are like, nah, I just want my cherry pies. I just want the comfort food of Twin Peaks. I don't want to actually engage with it as a piece of art. It became harder to make movies, but also because he himself just found it to be harder. Like I cannot understate how tough it is to get a movie made. It was hard then, it's hard now, and so to keep fighting and fighting that fight, I think I can totally see him just like lighting up when he gets his first digital camera, and he's like, oh, I just have like this SD thing and just put it in a computer and I can keep just like uploading like hours and hours of footage, no problems. I don't need to have like film stock, be afraid of like exposure and things like that. Just like I go out and shoot. It even has an autofocus feature. Like this is crazy. This is amazing. I can totally see him just falling in love with that, which is exactly what happened, pretty much. I don't know. I think what Ivan you said earlier of the full circle thing. I really like that with Eraserhead, because Eraserhead came from a place of purity, of pure creative freedom, which again, like you said, Jack, as well, right? It's not like he wasn't creatively free outside of Dune, but you just can tell that he was just kind of done with the narrative, straightforward, linear form. Even something like Twin Peaks: The Return, it goes full on into those long takes, just getting time to leave these spaces. And that's something that I have grown to love about Inland Empire, is that the feeling of space in here, whether it's the cramped apartment full of actresses, wannabe actresses, those dark streets of LA that are dirty and just nasty. Around, it feels like Sunset Boulevard, like Hollywood Boulevard. Sorry, um, all those places, the movie set where they're shooting with Justin Theroux and Jeremy Irons as a director. Also, we didn't mention this movie as Harry Dean Stanton, who's always a true gem in anything, especially a Lynch project. You get some nice moments in here. um, I think, yeah, it's just, I don't know if it's just one of those things where the more you watch a movie, the more, the comfier it gets, kind of. I feel it's almost inevitable for me that every single favorite film becomes a hangout movie of sorts. Whether it's hanging out with these characters or hanging out in these places, there is something here where, with the non-linear nature, the vignette nature of the film, it makes it just kind of fun to go like, oh, this is the moment where we are in Poland. This is the moment where they're on the film set. This is the Eric Stanton scene. Here we have William H. Macy, just kind of like jumping around the back. But the through line does become clear, at least the emotional through line does become clearer as soon as you start a second viewing, when you remember what happened in the film, at least. Where it's like, oh, this movie literally opens up with a girl watching a screen, and we end with that same girl watching the film herself. She also is part of the movie itself. Laura Dern ends up on the big screen. She gets applauded. She gets loved. It actually ends with Laura Dern as herself. Laura Dern, the younger self, wearing the dress from Blue Velvet. That's literally the final shot before the end credits. Like, there's so much here that is explicitly almost creating this nightmare feeling of just someone's watching a movie. Movies are dreams you can capture, dreams you can control. And the use of a 480p consumer grade camera, the use of like this shitty ass microphone on top of it, it creates that uncanny feeling that we were all talking about. That's just intoxicating. Um, all those moments, like, he recreates tiny instances that were present in previous films and adds so much, for me, so much horror to it. Um, like, there's all the moments where like Laura Dern just like slowly creeping towards the camera with a grin on her face. It's straight out of my nightmares, that image, literally. But one moment that always gets to me, is when the girls are in the apartment and just like start dancing to the Locomotion song, and they're all jumping around, and then as soon as they do one of the jumps on the beat, they just like vanish, and it fills me with so much scared emptiness. And you can get lost into potential analysis, which is also part of the fun with this film. It's like, oh, Hollywood, the abusive system, women getting eaten up by it, they're full of hopes and dreams and they need to band together. But we can talk about all of that. But just like emotionally, that makes me so scared. That sudden emptiness, that hollowness in it. And it's present throughout this entire movie. And just rewatching it this time, it really is a movie about death to me. And it's so, I don't know, it's not upsetting, but just, there is a feeling of just learning to embrace that fear throughout this, instead of keeping to run away, or getting lost into the fakeness of reality, of dreams and whatnot. You just need to go ahead and face it straight on, and that's the only way towards the light. I don't know how you feel just about the actual content of the film, outside of everything behind the scenes. We can spend like 5 hours on it. I'm curious how.
I'll say
just
this very briefly, because
Yeah.
I've read this in a lot of reviews, and it's the one thing where I will adamantly disagree with the consensus. I think the camcorder 480p is genuinely brilliant here, because it adds to that dreamlike, it adds to something like watching a nightmare in real time, which is uncomfortable and settling. But I also find the fact that you're actually watching something that's been documented and then found, lost and found. I think it adds to the dreamlike landscape like brilliantly. Everything you've said there, I find it really hard to argue. And listening to someone who talks very highly of something is very infectious. I do really appreciate, and I do like the idea of the analysis of him propping up the female form in cinema with Naomi Watts, and then you know with Laura Dern as well. Like he's always had his female companion muse on in his films, and I think it's a wonderful analysis to see it there. It's interesting. The one thing that I wanted to just mention very briefly, because we did it, I saw the TV Glow a few weeks ago, and watching and I can remember, I can like have sequences in that in my head where I'm like Jane Choban, like she obviously loves this. You can tell the Lynch thing. It's like the blue stuff, the tints, the way this is sort of shot. But that dreaminess that you talk about, like about death and about it feeling very uneasy, and there are sequences here where there is a horror or an uncomfortable, an associative, a brief of uh, let's say let's just say uneasiness. I don't see that here, and that's I think the one thing I blatantly miss. I don't find that Mulholland Drive sequence where they both leave the diner, and the woman who ironically is like the nun at The Conjuring is like he's like jumping up. Like I remember someone watching that and describing that to me, saying like it's one of the most haunting things you'll see. And I watched it and I was like, not really. I mean, it's scary, but it's scary within the context it's derived in. I don't think that's. I don't think he plays with horror in the convention that I would associate horror as, and I quite like that as a director again, who associates his own horrors and torments within imagery. I think that's like, especially in The Return, the sequences in there, I'm like, that's fucking haunting, and yet I don't think that probably scares him. Whereas the fact of having a newborn baby is probably the most horrifying moment in his life, and the fact that like that humanity, that's in his hands. I think that's why it's so personal to him in his work. So maybe it's just an idealism thing I've got. Maybe it's a disassociation with how I see terror. So me watching I Saw the TV Glow is going to be very different from someone else's perspective, be it queerness, be it age, or be it gender, whatever it is. I find the same thing appropriate here. I just find it very difficult to associate myself with this in a way where I'm like, is that meant to be haunting to me? Because I can understand when you read what you said about the snap cut of them going, like that to me is like, oh shit, that's quite scary. But then there's other stuff. I'm just like, his idea of genre convention is so disjointed from the ideal of what genre convention is, and weirdly, I would say I love that. But here, I just don't think it works. I think it's. You mentioned you sort of did a slip there earlier when you said about Sunset Boulevard, and I was like, the opening of this, I was like, oh my god, yes, yes, yes. Like he's always been a big fan of Hitchcock. He's gonna do some Billy Wilder here. Like I cannot wait to see this. And the first 45 minutes, I'm like, oh, she's gonna disassociate within this film, and she's going to sort of split personality. We're going to sort of do the Mulholland Drive thing, but we're going to go on Lost Highway. So I'm already sort of getting my idea of like, and ultimately we come to the end of it, and I had the same issue of those inputs, which I've mentioned before. But after that, I'm like, it just melds into sort of something where I'm like, this is just David Lynch. And maybe that's why you love it so much. Maybe that's why you and Ivan love it so much. But for me, I find that very difficult to gravitate towards because it's so distinctively lacking of any form of not acceptance, but let's say immersion. I think you've got to be so indebted to the Lynchian model, and I do find, in a very strange way, its greatest strength is its worst enemy within this. I think it's the one where it's so difficult to unravel and gravitate towards because it's so in his wheelhouse. And I'd love to know if what Ivan says about this, if he thought before he made this is it. Because if that's true, I'll give this a little bit more leeway and think, do you know what? I like that fuck you attitude. Do what you want. You've been here for 40, 50 years. You're gonna do what you want, or 30 years anyway. You've been fucked over by the big boys of studios. Do what you want. I'll give that a little bit of a leeway. If not, I'm a little bit more. I don't know, but it'd be interesting to know to Carson, because Carson's first watches. I think I've seen all three. This is my first watch, but I'd seen the other two. I don't know. I would love to know someone who's like into Lynch, like who's just got into it. I don't know. I don't even find this. Is this even accessible? Like, how does anyone get into this and be like, well, you have to watch it 3-4 times? Like, it's not Richard Kelly, Southland Tales sort of stuff. But it's still you don't need the manifesto at the side. You don't need the comic book. But whew, yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see it again, but I'm fucking fascinated to know what someone who's not a Lynchian fan would think of this.
I mean, I think it's a layered discussion, right? I mean, there's complications here. We're like, obviously, as Ivan was talking about the circular nature between this and Eraserhead, you're not going to necessarily get those pieces. Or like you mentioned, Rabbits, there's a bunch of connections to his older works, the Blue Velvet Dress. Like, there's a lot here to where if you're not a diehard Lynch fan, maybe you're not going to make those connections and you're not going to put those together. But I do think, again, even on a first viewing, even as someone, and now to be clear, I've seen all of his works outside of Twin Peaks. I do think that there is enough here to where you're going to engage with some conversation, even if maybe it's not necessarily about Lynch directly, where he is in life or him as an artist. I think the connections between this and Eraserhead, I certainly would not say to me strike as intentional. I think those are just both signs of what Lynch is as an artist when he is free. And undeniably, I think he is the freest here that he's been since Eraserhead, even just in goals. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing per se, because I think nearly every other work he's created for me is more engaging than this. But I think that you don't necessarily need to be a diehard Lynch stan to come in here and have the book next to you and be like, okay, here's the reference. Oh, this is directly a reference to Lost Highway or Blue Velvet. And this is, and I'm putting all this together. But I also think it would definitely help. I mean, when you have a taxing viewing experience like this, which I would call taxing, just with how much work you have to put in, I feel like, to get something out. I think it's always going to help if you have that connection to the artist and you have as much context as possible. I think the best way I can relate to it is like you can watch a Hayao Miyazaki film, Hayao Miyazaki's Boy and the Heron, and get something from it. A lot of people did. But if you understand the artist and his like personal life and his personal story, you're going to get a lot more from it. It's not a requirement, but it definitely is going to help you go further with the project and probably have some more personal takeaways. But I guess that really is the case for like all artists, right? We just covered O Canada on the podcast, and not that anyone saw that, but like we get a lot more from that film because we know Schrader and we have that context of Schrader. Same with Guadagnino Queer. Same with pretty much like every project that's really obviously personal for an artist. And this is personal, even if it's just in the form that it's created from for Lynch. You're going to get a lot more the more context you have the person behind it and you can see those connections. So no, I wouldn't say it's required. And I definitely am not the person who is watching this, getting all the references and getting all the connections and making this beautiful thesis of how this ties into his life. But I also would say that it's not like it's a wall then. So I think it's a layered answer.
Well, there's something I want to say. I don't think you have to be a Lynch stan to be into Inland Empire. I think maybe you have to be okay. Not to say like it's a lot of this film is about art, and I think for an artist can connect to this film even if they're not a fan of Lynch necessarily. But like, I think that's something, not to say like that someone who doesn't connect is not, of course it can be, but to me, I think what's interesting, I wouldn't agree with Jack that he's repeating the same stories all over again. I think Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive do have certain similarities, but they feel very, very different as movies. But I think this is actually, I think, a lot influenced by transcendental meditation, which, he's been practicing, I think, since forever, but it really became a part of his life in a big way, public way, in the early 2000s. And so I think it found its way a lot in this movie, more so, at least explicitly, more so in this movie than any other works he's done before. And to me, and I would just add to what Nick was saying about dying. So there's also the idea of reincarnation, that now the more that I watch this movie, this idea keeps coming back to me. And this is not something that I got on the first time. If you ask Jack what I got on the first time, is nothing. I got nothing. So it's only like after reading and watching more. So I think because it's really there's these, let's say, three main characters. There's the lost girl who's crying in the hotel room in Poland in the beginning and in the end. We have Nikki Grace, the actress, and we have Susan Blue, the character. Now there's probably more characters or variations of the characters, but there's certain elements that keep repeating over and over again. We have the abusive husband. We have a trapped woman, a woman in trouble, right? We have an affair that comes out of trying to escape that oppression in the marriage. There's a murder, and there's a karmic debt that needs to be paid. This is the idea of the unpaid bill. And then it ends with breaking this cycle and paying the karmic debt through acting performance, through art. It's like the power of art on to the path of enlightenment. And so these kind of ideas keep reappearing to me. There's a line that keeps reappearing in the movie, first said by those Valley girls, where they say, the quote is, "Look at us and tell us if you've known us before." To me, that is a reference, like if you've known me before in a past life, because those same girls are later on in Poland, in Łódź, which I just visited this year to visit these filming locations. So they are the same people, just in past life. So this idea, look at me and tell me if you've known me before, to me is pointing to reincarnation. And again, that ties with the idea of death. And I think Lynch is, now there's many different ways to interpret it, but this is the one that I'm really connecting to nowadays, is that he is thinking about death, but he also is thinking about his past lives and his future lives, and just like the characters in this movie. And one thing I would bring up is the beginning scene with Grace Zabriskie, who's always amazing, whatever she does, and to me that conversation is the key to the movie, and it's like trying to decipher it. If it can be deciphered at all, I think helps. Martha Nachimson, who's a writer who wrote 2 books about Lynch, who interviewed him extensively, knows him personally. She wrote these really 2 good books, and she talked about this conversation, and there's 3 elements that show up in that conversation. There's a marketplace, there's the alley behind the marketplace, and there's the palace. Now, these are some more, some less explicit terms from transcendental meditation. And for Martha Nachimson, what she said, that these are concepts derived from TM. And so marketplace is kind of this transactional illusion that we all live in, that we all accept as reality. Call it capitalism, call it Hollywood, call it our everyday lives, but it's a part of all of our lives, something that we cannot escape. The palace is Lynch's name for enlightenment, for the state of enlightenment, for freedom, for deep wisdom that is difficult to reach for most of us. And the alley behind the marketplace is a path of faith and intuition that leads you from one to the other, from marketplace to enlightenment. And the ending scene is very much feels like this kind of really joyful, happy ending, specifically focusing on female joy. That to me is this is the palace. We have reached the palace in the end. And what I find really interesting in the end, where Laura Dern or Nikki, let's say, where Nikki starts in the beginning, where she ends in that last scene, you could see the arc that she's gone, because in the first scene, she's very kind of tense, very, very guarded, very rigid. In the last scene, she's serene, she's relaxed, she's glowing. And if you notice, her husband is not there. Her abusive husband is not there. Her Devin, her acting partner, is not there. The director, Kingsley, is not there. She's there surrounded by women and by women's joy. And to me, this feels like this character has found herself through art, through her performance. I think that to me is like certain idea. Like I said, this isn't the only way you can interpret the movie, but maybe this can guide you in some direction that when you watch it again, you really do have to see this movie more than a few times. And I know it can be a challenge, but like maybe having these kind of things that you can be thinking about while you're watching it can maybe help to like guide you at least in some path that maybe you'll find a way to connect with it.
Can I just say really quickly here, just speaking on your two opinion here, Nick and Ivan, and you've been massive fans of Twin Peaks, and before this, it tried to make Mulholland Drive into another TV show. The 90-minute TV pilot's infamous, and then the irony that after this, the last thing he really does is the return on TV with Showtime. Do you think this would have been more? What do you think? I'll rephrase it. Do you think this would have prospered better as a narrative and long form TV then? Or do you think this has to have been a cinematic venture for 3 hours? Do you not think this would have been better at the 12-hour mark then? Do you not think
This is Jack. This is what it is. This is Inland Empire. Like, it exists
Stop.
at this thing. There's no. I think we can get lost into like potentially. Sure, give me the 20-hour version, but that literally exists in like a multiverse where that actually happened.
No, I don't
Maybe
mean.
this
I don't even
exists.
mean that.
Maybe Inland Empire could literally just be davidlynch.com, where he was uploading for like 8 years or something like that, clips on his website of short films that he shot with his son in his studio just randomly on vacations. Like, I don't think Inland Empire needs to be at 20. I don't think it needs to be narrative focused, because that's not the point of it. Like, it's I like it's so it's so hard to put it into words. Like, if you make Inland Empire into like 18 hours of Twin Peaks The Return, it becomes something completely different than what it is now. Structurally, pacing wise, would it work? Maybe. But it's so hard for me. I don't know if Ivan maybe feels different, but it's so hard for me to to even
I
picture
don't even
something
mean.
like that.
I don't even mean stretched out 20 hours. What I mean is, I sort of read into a little bit what you said about the davidlynch.com there. I think this would work a lot better as an experimental serial, um, 30-minute entry on davidlynch.com every day, just like, and then having an audience go to that, piece it together, because then you get sort of the evolution with filmmaking there on the online thing, the mid 2000s. I don't think this deserves like I don't think you can say this is like a 12-hour, but I think he's just changed from. I think his long form content now. I think because his like Dune is like 2.5 hours. You got a 3 hour cut of that as well. You've got Mulholland Drive, which is like hitting 2.5 hours. Even the likes of Lost Highways, what, 2:10, 2:15 almost.
10.
I think, yeah, you get to a point where I think he sort of looks to a more extravagant long form content to tell his stories. And I don't think there's anything issue there. I just think he really likes to this slow form of storytelling, if that's figuratively and literally what you said about the return. I just think that this is very much, if it was just slowed down a little bit more, and then they go, granted, this irony saying I'm not really a big fan of it, but I just think I think his appetite changes from I can do this in 2 hours. I think it is what it is. I think that's a perfect. It is what it is. It was 3 hours, but I think his mindset, his operandi, has just changed slightly into long form content at that point. I think he's totally unbothered by the fabrics of identity, of convention and cinematic form. I don't think he gives a shit how close a frame is anymore. I think he doesn't, and I mean this in the whole heart. Does it positivity wise? I don't think he's like, oh, I don't care. I don't care. Like, whatever he says. I think he's not bothered about people trying to influence his filmmaking and his abstract. I think he's at that point now where I want this close to Laura Dern. I want to get this close here. I want to put the camera here. And obviously with the camcorder, he's able to afford to do that a lot more. And it's in what you said about restrictions with the return when he's that documentary, which I've seen snippets of it, where someone's like, wrap it up, and he's like, and he just looks at them and he's like, and he's speaking to an executive who was probably financed this project, and gives him both barrels. And I think it's a form of that with this as well. And I think the one positive I have is that it's a director free of limitation. He's not interested in to what his audience is going to think about it before he's made it. Totally not bothered. He is so free of of a thought about predisposed opinion, which I think now, with the amount of films that have come out that are already being gatekept and crafted, with it be it AI or done by executives in a small room about what sells, what doesn't, what they think audiences want. I think he comes at a time here where it's so refreshing to be like, I'm not really bothered what A, B, and C may see this. I want to do this, I want to do that, and he brought some friends along with the ride. But I just think when his long form content after this goes into the return, I do think he struggles with it. I think he struggles with the idea of, you've got. I think he probably sees it as a 27-hour movie, maybe, or like say 22-hour movie, which I think a lot of cinematic people do within television. I don't really think that's the really idea to do it. I listened to the God, I don't think if you can say this out loud, but I listened to the Roger Avery and Tarantino episode on Joe Rogan, and Tarantino was talking about long form entertainment, about Yellowstone, and I thought like he was right. The first season of Yellowstone's really good, but I can't. And I've seen season 2 and 3. I can't remember who the villain is of season 2. I can't remember I can remember Gil Birmingham. I can remember Kevin Costner and stuff like that, but you don't remember that because it's serialized. It's like the hour. You're not there for the 22 hours. You're there for the hour. And I think with the return, I think a lot of cinematic abstracts see it as it's just 21 hours. It's a 20-hour long movie. That's bullshit to me. I think you're there for the hour. And I think Twin Peaks perfectly gets that because it's just so sort of like, what is going on? And I think for that hour, it works wonderfully. The 45 minutes. I think for the 3 hours here, it's just difficult. It's a difficult one where it's split. If this was part 1, 2, and 3, I probably would have a lot of an easier digestion with it. But like you said, Nick, as a Lynch fan here, it is what it is, and I sort of appreciate that. I like that. I like the boldness to it. He is undoubtedly one of a kind. There is a before and there is an after.
Truly.
And everyone after are replications and students of the game, and no one has quite caught that little bit. Maybe we're going to say Robert Eggers, but even that he's a little bit more commercial. I don't think everyone's found the boundary between commercialism and experimental quite like he did in the 80s and 90s. And I just think this is probably of a bygone era, but nevertheless a very interesting one in his career. But long form content, he definitely moved on from time frames and running times. He's not. Mr. Lynch is not bothered anymore, is he, about hitting a sweet 90 minutes?
He's transcended from runtime. He's transcended from narrative.
So
That's for certain. I like that this is a feature film for a couple reasons, and I think this is probably the best format for a few things. I think the impact of the digital camera really shines through. The fact that this is a film, that this is a feature, and that visual choice. If this was just like a web series, I don't think that'd hit quite as hard. And then also, I think there's just so much in here, at least on my first viewing, a reading of like the power of film. And we mentioned death and rebirth and life. And I think there's so much here about how when you capture something in a film on screen, on camera, whether it's authentic or not, that will always live on within the image. I think going back to the Blue Velvet dress here, she'll always be that young actress on Blue Velvet, no matter how many years in the future, whether her body's alive or dead, she will always be that girl still in those frames. And rebirth through film. I think there's a lot here that I caught on that, and that's at least the most engaging read I had. And I think that is more impactful, more engaging when it's seen through a feature film itself. Again, if it was through a web series, I think that might be a more engaging delivery as far as like a viewing experience, just to keep going back to it and the engaging there rather than just sitting through a 3-hour chunk. But I think the poignance of that and the poignance of a lot of this film shines through it being a feature film as just a statement itself. So I think probably for emotional takeaways, maybe not for viewing experience, but for actually creating a purpose and a point, I think the film is the version I like.
Totally. And also, like, funnily enough, you have rabbits, just as a side note, even rabbits which are present in this film in part. They are of the web series that he made, basically. I think it's like 3 or 4 episodes, correct me if I'm wrong, that he released on his website, and then he found a new life for them in Inland Empire. So he's also already toyed with the idea of that, but yeah, sorry.
No, I just wanted to add. I think it's a really interesting idea, but to me, I feel like if you don't, it would make it more digestible to put it like in a mini series, like a 4 or 5 episodes. But I feel like if you don't connect with it, like in putting it in, small pieces is not going to help in the end. It's if you don't connect with it, if you don't feel it, it's not going to work anyway. I feel like to me, what Carson was just saying, having it as a feature, the best way I can put it is you have to go through the hell of those 3 hours to get to the heaven of those end credits so that it feels earned. And I feel like when you have that all in one whole piece, I think it works more effectively. Having it at the end of a mini series, I don't think it would have that kind of same effect, but it would make it more digestible. I just feel like people who hate the movie would hate the show anyway, you know?
Oh yeah, it's what happened with the end of The Return, basically. I was like, what the fuck? We spent 18 hours the past 4 months for this bullshit? And I'm like, yeah, it's amazing. It's so good. But even in here, like, I've grown to love so much just the final 10, 15 minutes of this film. There's something so beautiful about Laura Dern. Like, she faces those demons, she faces herself and this ghastly figure that has been tormenting her for the entire film. And then she just runs to this girl. She's free of the hotel, they embrace. You have the first collaboration in a movie with Christabel, David Lynch, the Polish song just kind of like swelling. It's such an overwhelmingly beautiful moment. And then you get to the end credits. Laura Herring is there. The monkey that was mentioned earlier is there. there's a Twin Peaks woodsman cutting some wood is there, and it's just like Sinnerman starts playing, and like genuinely every time I've seen it since my second viewing, I just stand up and dance to that song because it's so. You put it perfectly, Ivan. It's like the hell of the previous of what just happened. You're just free. Movie's over, and you just need to shake it off. And it's so cathartic. And I've said it. That's like my bingo card. Like saying that a movie. I love when a movie feels cathartic, and this one 100% does. Lynch always knows how to deliver those strong emotions in the final moments of his films, and in this one, it's just an absolute treat for an audience. um, and I find it so funny that like we talk about like the freedom and everything, and he had some constraints in the past with we talked about it on the Blue Velvet episode that he had a 2 hour runtime limit and they already shot like so many other hours and they had to cut it down. Same thing happened with Fire Walk with Me, with so many other projects. And then with this one where he had complete freedom, there's literally a deleted scenes featurette or film which is like 70 minutes long called More Things That Happened. An absolute dream of mine is to create a fan edit where it's just like called like Inland Empire Everything That Happened, and just like trying to find a way of putting them into the film. I don't even know if it's possible, but just as an exercise it would be so fun. um, and those moments are also worthwhile. I would say there's like one sequence especially where it's like in Polish with the ghostly figure man is like threatening someone with a watch. I think that's very intriguing. But yeah, it's such a unique beast from one of the most unique filmmakers we ever had. I think what you said, Jack, of saying that we really don't have or haven't had anyone like him who managed to be this bold, experimental, but also managing to capture audiences, like general audiences. Like, I'm still shocked. Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive, Oscar nominated Best Director. Like, we never get this nowadays. I think if it ever happens, it's always like a art house European director who's like, oh, I think he made something that was a bit more artistic this year, and the Academy took notice. But it's never for something like what Lynch made. And every artist who's been inspired by him owes a lot to him, but will never be him. Which is, I think, the best thing, honestly. It's impossible to replicate.
Nick or anyone on the call, do you think that's because the artists are not living up to what Lynch did, or do you think it's on the audiences who are not responding?
Oh my
No,
god.
no, I think it's something. It's I don't remember if we talked about it or I heard it on a podcast, but something that I've heard about recently a lot is just the fact that, and I completely subscribe to it, is that more often than not nowadays in the digital era, artists only replicate from people that they look up to, which would be like, oh, I want to be a filmmaker because I saw Blue Velvet, let's say, and I only go back to Lynch. Whatever I try to make will always be just copying someone that I like. David Lynch, we talked about it. He didn't start out as a filmmaker. He wasn't saying I want to be Hitchcock, you know. He was like, oh, I want to be like my friend Keeler, who's just making a living with paintings. That's living the hard life. That's what I want. He wanted to be a painter. He was also someone who read a lot, who cared about so many other things that are not related to cinema. He barely cares about cinema in the way that someone like Tarantino, for instance, you mentioned earlier, who does live and breathe cinema, or Scorsese. But also those artists read, they travel, they have so many other interests. I think that the main problem nowadays that we are facing with certain films, certain mediocrity, is that it's just artists replicating other artists who belong in the same medium of art. There's no curiosity, there's no willingness to go beyond that. And I think that watching something like Inland Empire genuinely feels like you're experiencing something that's beyond cinema. I think you said it right, Carson. You said it's like a video art installation potentially, and I think that's beautiful because we very rarely see that on this canvas, on this scope. It's fantastic. I'm one of those weird guys who's like, oh shit, video art museum. I can spend like 2 hours watching a robot moving rocks in the desert. Maybe something interesting will happen. I'll be there. How long is the video? 2.5 hours. I'll be there. So yeah, no, I'm curious how the others feel about this, but those are my 2 cents.
I think it's probably a bit of both. I think the fact of there's always been an issue between target and intended audiences, and I think I'm not. I think if you've got a creative who is idiosyncratic and has an aesthetic that's totally different from anyone else, you will gravitate an audience because it's distinctively different from what anyone else does. I think there's always if you go. I think that's why not just sunshine. That's why fashion is such an interesting medium as well. Like how that formulates. How does anyone set a trend? Like it just people wear something, it becomes popular and it takes on, but trends often die out. And I think with audiences, I think it's an interesting one because you can only, like what Nick said, I completely subscribe to that as well, and that's undoubtedly true. You can only take on what you see, or you can only become indebted to that by you seeing it work. And I think the issue is probably there's very it probably comes down to financial risk and reward with experimental film because you've got to have something you can sell to a mass amount of audiences, but because it's so sort of esoteric, I mean, you've got to find such a thin balance. And I think Lynch, for a long time of his career, managed to do that. He managed to give narrative and form, but change certain aspects into just being very wild concepts. I think after a while, you get the 90s, and then filmmakers rapidly come in. You can shoot on like very quick, and then the 2000s come. You can shoot even quicker. Then the mid 2000s come. And you can shoot on a camcorder, and you can shoot digital. And 35mm prints die out very quickly because they're too expensive. Anyone can be a filmmaker. The iPhone comes out. I think once you liquidate the database, and experimental can be someone in their bedroom maximizing lighting. It's interesting, like what constitutes, a David Lynch film anymore. It's a difficult one because it's hard to. I'm not the greatest fan. I really like his work, but I'm not a diehard fan. But I think it's an aspect of why are people going to bankroll opportunities like that of gravitating towards a 10-15%. And this is so fucking difficult to talk about because it's actually really sad. But it's sad not in like, oh my god, like what a nerd, like quite depressing. I think people are not going to bankroll to a 10%, 15 audiences that in 10 years, 20 years time will grow with a director rather than just having a film. Yeah, they did very well. Put them in a blockbuster. Put them in a blockbuster. And I think from the trail of what's happened there, from if it's Colin Trevorrow, if it's whoever you want to go to, it doesn't really work very well. Anita Costa is another one. It doesn't work very well, and I think there's such a lack of growth anymore. And I think watching David Lynch with the abstract experiment, growing with the bigger budgets and growing into what he wants to do, watching Eraserhead, then watching Blue Velvet, then watching Mulholland Drive, I think is really quite inspiring. Quite like just like you can do it. I just don't think you can do it now. I've just trying to look on Letterboxd about. I know I keep on mentioning it, but like trying to find that commercial experimental director. And aside from Jane Schoenbaum, which I know I'm butchering her last name, and I think that's going to be probably the one for a little bit now. But it's such a minute, and obviously Nicolò Grasso, but it's such a minute um, pool of people. I don't know. I tell you what, I'd be interested to. Within across America regionally, how well Lynch's films do. If it's on the East Coast or West Coast, I'd love to know how they do in the within the Austin, or how they would do in Louisiana, or how they would do in Montana. I'd find that so interesting of how he talks about suburbia, how he talks about the mundanity of life and stuff. Maybe it's something like that. Maybe honest of just want comfort food, perhaps. Maybe they don't want to think and feel anymore, which within this certain sort of criteria of the world, I wouldn't blame them.
I don't know if I see Inland Empire doing that well in like Missoula, but maybe
it was number one. But it was the number one in Missoula, allegedly. That's not true.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that one.
Yeah, it did really well in Louisiana. No, it didn't. Little Rock, Arkansas. It was on the board. I'll tell you that.
Well, they were big Lost Highway fans there.
Think, so. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, Elephant Man did really well down there.
You know, I think when you hear Lynch talk, he always talks about the idea. That's like his favorite word. And he always talks about staying true to the idea. So I don't think it's just that, oh, I don't care what the audience or anybody else thinks. He's just, I think, following his idea. And I think by what he means is it could be his instinct or his creativity or his subconscious or whatever it is. But I think that's more important to him than anything else. And that's what he's sticking to. And I think, I'm not sure that this was purposeful, that this would be his last film. There were other scripts. There was the antelope script. There was other scripts that he wasn't able to find funding for, or he couldn't do it in a way that he has complete control, final cut, all of that. So I do think it's not that this wasn't purposeful, and it's not that. I think in a large part it's just hard to find funding for something like this. So even though I do agree with Nick that there is this lack of curiosity in reading and in traveling and whatever, he put it so well. But I think at the end of the day, there's just it's very hard to get funding from, even if it's just $10 million. I mean, that's still a lot of money. It's hard to find something on that level to be able to make something, because you do need someone like Laura Dern, not just for marketing purposes, but also to have this kind of quality of actress who's, one of the greatest actresses of her generation. I don't think that's a hot take. So it's very hard to find that, maybe if you're starting out or you made 2 or 3 films, it's you do have to compromise a lot. And even if you talk about Eggers, I mean, he just has 4 films now, right? This is his 4th film, I think, right? Mm-hmm. So it's it's too early to tell. I don't think Lynch can ever be imitated, because I think when people do try, they fail completely. Because they don't have that something. I don't know what that something is, but they don't have it. I think when people stick to their ideas and they're able to get funding, and the more they go on in their career, maybe it will get easier, maybe not, I don't know. But I feel like I'm gonna be a little bit more optimistic and hopeful and say that maybe we will have these maybe Eggers in 20 years, I don't know, is gonna make some kind of Inland Empire that's gonna be completely his own, and it's not gonna be an imitation of Lynch, but it's gonna be his idea that comes out in a movie. And maybe by some wonder, let's be hopeful, he'll be able to get funding for it. Or if not him, my favorite movie this year was The Substance, and her Faget, let's just say Faget,
Carly.
Yeah, I don't want to butcher her name, but it's Maybe she'll be able. She has a very distinct idea of what she's trying to do, and I think she's very successful at it. And I think maybe in 20 years she could make her own inland empire that's going to be completely her own, and God willing, she'll be able to get funding for it, because I think this is there is hope. There is hope because these kind of movies are being made, and some, like, even in a larger scale, like The Substance. And so I want to be more hopeful. Like I want to believe.
I think Astor's probably, for me, how I see the closest, probably voiceover Eggers, for example.
Bo is afraid, yes. Bo is afraid.
Yeah, the issue is that he's a bad filmmaker, but I was both afraid. So moving on from that, I think the biggest thing for me, though, and Jack, then you can go in a second, is just like, I think the biggest thing is trust, both with audiences and the crew. I don't think it just takes a Laura Dern, who's a great filmmaker, or a great artist or a great actor, but I think it takes a great actor like Laura Dern who's willing to put her full trust and faith in a director to take care of her and to lead her and guide her and just trust the process. And I think it takes audiences who are also trusting that Lynch, it's going to be weird. It's going to be probably an odd film, take some work, but it's going to ultimately be a payoff. I think that is the biggest thing we are lacking when it comes to getting people to go to the theater, to have that experience, is they're not necessarily having the trust or the connection with these creators, who also are not necessarily like, this is a time with Lynch and with Waters where you are getting an incredible amount of trust between artist and actor, where you're seeing these collaborations over and over again, not necessarily something we're seeing a ton of today. So I think that's probably the biggest thing I see, is a lack of trust, is not building that trust. But there are some cases where it's being built. So we'll see in like 20 years where we are with those cases. Jack, what were you going to say?
I thought you were literally going to say the same thing I was going to say. I'm very much on those lines, but I'm going to be a bit more cutting with this. I think an issue with what happened with Lynch as well, and I think Inland Empire was like the stopgap for it, was that in his career he never really gave finality, never really gave answers. And it's something where at the beginning with a filmmaker I always quite like. I'm like this is going to be a very strange comparison, but just go with it. Damien Leone, who's done The Terrifier, he's done the very same thing here, where he's made a trilogy of horror films, and within 6 hours of cinema, has not given away one thing about the mythology of the creature that he's made. I think that's genuinely, in the day and age now of having to over-examine and explain everything, is quite marvelous. In a very similar context, but tomato. I think Lynch has done a similar type of thing within his creations, where aside from the obvious narratives like Elephant Man and Straight Story, etc., he's not able to give a closed-end bookend to anything, because I don't think he likes working within the form of what reality is. It's very much dreamwave. It's very much like, you can put into this what you want to get out of it, but there's just no full stop here. This is, you can watch us back to front, you can watch us out of sequence. The form, the form, whatever you want to say it is what it is. But it's such this magical thing where it just refuses to give you an answer. And even when he does, there's always that sort of like burning sensation behind your eyes, where it's like, but something's just like, it may have gone back to normal, but under the ground, whatever it is, something's sort of bubbling up. And it's like Wild at Heart, Mulholland Drive, like nothing ends on a sweet note. It either ends very sweet and sour, or it just does not give the finality it wants. And I think the human consciousness, as it grows older, or even more mature, it becomes far more like wary about things. And I think audiences, as they grow, if it's a filmmaker, or let's say just with the product, which again makes me feel sick even saying that, but it is what it is. I think audiences want a form of putting the book down, like when just for the sake of the experience, but also for the sake of being able to be like, oh, okay, I understand that. And this is not to be degrading to anyone. It's not to be like a backhanded compliment or even patronising. But I think a lot of audiences don't want to have that idea of expression of like, and I said this all the time on this podcast, so that this might rhyme and rhythm here, but audiences want to open the book, go to the cinema or watch it at home and close that fucker and move on. And I think that's why people are tired of the MCU. That's why people are so fucking tired now of watching these Disney Plus stuff, because these shows are going on forever. That's why the miniseries is taking over. That's why HBO for the longest time recently have been doing really well, because it's 6 episodes and then they have to make something fucking more on it. But it's always been 6 episodes. That's why True Detective should never ever have had season 2, 3, and 4. But I think that long form content, again, like I think that just people want to close the book, and thematically with David Lynch, he will refuse to give that. Even when you think like this is A, B, and C, and the construct is simple and the conventions are there, he will refuse to give the audience. And this is not to be malice; it's to be like, but this is life, and it weaves in and like it's dreamlike, you know. And I think audiences have grown with it. I've sort of pushed that away now. I think people just want the bookend, and I think throughout like the early 2000s with the rise of The Sopranos and the HBO, I just think people just want the hour there, and then they can like, oh, okay, I can shut off now and watch something else. I think 3 hours of watching a film like this for an audience. I think it probably was before this as well. I think it started probably with Lost Highway. I think just audiences like really struggled with the idea of like, but you're challenging me, and I don't like that. And that's such a sad indictment of the audience that we've got. And I really do think it's true. There's so many people now who just do not want to. It's what like Ivan says as well. Like, they just don't want to have the conversation. They don't want to not even accept, but they don't want to challenge themselves about having at looking at the context or the content and looking at and not even sort of dissecting it, just like challenging themselves about what it says about you, about what it says about what's it trying to say. Like the amount of times where like I've watched something with someone like, what did you think? Like, like what did you think? You're like, you should always have something to say about art, like even if you don't like it. I just think there's a severe lack of like making art now and having an expression, being able to have a conversation about it, like just even exploring the abstract anymore. And I think it's happening now all the time. Like if it's Joker 2, I just think that there's people like just not wanting to have a conversation about what it's trying to suggest and that. And I think Inland Empire, all of Lynch's stuff, I think it demands just a conversation at least, or just a thought process. I just think everything's sanitized now, and it's an indictment of the industry itself. But there are a few filmmakers out there carrying that mantle, and as cinema progresses, as the culture does as well, there's so much more conversations. We're talking about gender a lot more. We're talking about social acceptance. We're talking about a multifaceted approach to stuff, and I think there's filmmakers there will definitely be there for it. It's just a shame that in 10 years' time, I just don't want to be in a world where someone goes, "Do you know who David Lynch is?" and they'll go, "No." That to me is like the godfather of experimental cinema on mainstream. Bar Louis Buñuel and stuff like that. That will be fucking absolutely frightening to live in that world, and I think we're on the cusp of it. But I was just going to ask, this will be 20 years old next year. Why do you think? And this is to anyone here. I know Carson wants to call it a day. I don't want to go on forever. But why do you think this hasn't had a reappraisal? And it's 20 years. It's a long time to be there. Why has it not had that second wind? You've had the 4K remaster and the anniversary of Mulholland Drive by Studio Canal. All Twin Peaks has gone there again. You know, there's always conversations about that. This one feels like the one where it's just slowly maintaining standard, or what, I don't know what it is. But for 20 years it's been on the quiet. I was just wondering what everyone thought about that.
I think it's actually had the reappraisal that you mentioned. Like for something
Really?
especially that's so specific, it's one of the highest rated films of Lynch on Letterboxd. It got the 4K restoration, which I have issues with because they use the Topaz Video Lab AI.
Oh yeah, like 28 Days Later, you can't elevate the image, can you? It's like it's a. Right.
I think conceptually it's an interesting idea to do the experiment. The experimental film shot at 480p. We're gonna enhance it using like this experimental AI. I don't think it looks that great. I've seen the Blu-ray multiple times, and I really like that version, like the graininess of it all. The fact that they've removed a lot of the noise now, it's taking something away from it. But I would say it's had that reappraisal. I would say honestly at this point, pretty much everything in Lynch's filmography, even Dune, has gotten reappraised in some way thanks to the Denis Villeneuve film, where people went back. So even someone like Carson, honestly, like we talked about it many times, where we're like, oh shit, Dune's actually kind of slaps. It's actually not that bad. Why do people hate it? I think it's inevitable for almost any artist's work. You give it those 20 years more or less, people are going to come around to it, people are going to discover it. Fire Walk with Me has become almost like objectively one of his most beloved films. Bow That Can. Inland Empire is getting more and more loved by people. It's becoming this introduction into the avant-garde type of filmmaking. It got booed at Venice. It's history repeating itself. I even Wild at Heart, Palme d'Or winner Wild at Heart, got booed when they gave the prize. Like it always takes time for these things. Like we always go back to The Thing was a commercial failure. Like can't trust audiences. Just only time is the true signifier of things.
I agree to a point. Number one, Dune is great, let's be clear. But I think that Inland Empire has become more iconic and more discussed. I do think compared to his others, though, I do feel like, at least within my circles and my little bubble of people who talk about film, there are less takes and less analysis of Inland Empire than I see of like Blue Velvet, Lost Highway, obviously like Eraserhead. And I think some of that is because I think it's probably his most inaccessible work. I mean, the fact that it takes multiple watches, it's not particularly fun or easy to follow, and it's 3 hours long. Like, that does not necessarily equal a really great viewing experience. But kind of tying in Jack's points, I think that I'm not so pessimistic about audiences nowadays. I think something like I Saw the TV Glow comes out that is very up to interpretation, and people are engaging with it and people are seeing it. But it doesn't help that you have creators like Charlie Kaufman, who like opening weekend of I'm Thinking I'm Ending Things, or whatever that film was, is coming out with an article being like, this is exactly what it means. I think the conversation, this is the beautiful thing about Lynch, and you mentioned how Lynch doesn't want to give these answers, is that it opens the conversation up to be more accessible, because it's not about figuring out the answer, what's in the film. This is the set thing that Lynch is trying to dissect, and we're trying to get it right. But rather, it's about, what do you see within this film? What do I see within this film? And we can have that conversation. When those films are coming out, like I Saw the TV Glow, that has, I think, a really genuine craft and has this brilliance behind it in a similar way to where Lynch does, to where it is abstract at times, but it's abstract with a heart and soul. I think audiences are still responding. I think the more abstract you get, and the more audiences are being conditioned with features that, like, yes, it's really weird, but there is a correct answer. I think that is when the thought of just having these conversations are going to continue to go away, to where I think audiences now, and I'm sure we all have our friends who in 2020 like just saw a random film and were like, wow, this is Lynchian. I think their ability to communicate with Lynch and access these features and discuss them, it's going to go away, because there's no just like right answer to find. And that is the worrying trend. But like, I am hopeful that I think there are examples every year, more and more seemingly, where it is catching on and people are having these conversations around worthy films. So I'm not overly concerned, but I think with Inland Empire, it just isn't accessible. And the conversation is trending in a way to where I think less and less are willing or feel reward in engaging in that conversation.
Yeah. I'll say it is a very challenging film, in every respect. And I think most people just, well, I shouldn't generalize, but it is a hard film to engage. It is a hard film to get into. And I think even for Lynch fans, even for diehard Lynch fans, I think this is a tough one. And because all of his films look so gorgeous and so painterly, and every frame is like a painting, and even though there's some really really beautiful shots, like now that I watch it, I'll like there's that shot of you know she's sitting in the chair, and there's the dancers behind her, and the camera is really moving frenetically. Like, I think that's a beautiful shot. Or there's a lot of memorable images in it too, like the guy with the light bulb, and her running across Hollywood and Vine. And there are very very beautiful moments and beautiful shots, but they're not 35 millimeters, they're not 4K, and I think that's a challenge for people, and the length of it as well. So I think I think in time, I think the more time that goes on, I think people will start to appreciate it more. I think the most beautiful thing about Lynch is that he doesn't explain his work. I think that's the gift that he gives to all of us, especially those of us who are his fans, but all of his viewers. I think that's a really beautiful thing because you can interpret it in whatever way you want, and you're not going to be wrong, and he'll never tell you no, that's wrong. And I think that's a great thing because a lot of filmmakers nowadays, you have the whole business. I was just talking to a friend the other day, this whole business of ending explained, like put in any movie and there's ending explained, and I'm like, half of these films, like I didn't need this. It's like the ending is so clear, it doesn't need an explanation. And I think, with viewers, I think most of us or most people, when you watch a film, you want to have it wrapped up. You want to have a clear idea or a clear message. You want to feel some kind of order, some kind of semblance of order that you do not have in your chaotic life. So you look for that in fiction, not just in film, in any kind of art form. And when you don't get that, it's even more frustrating because it's like, listen, I already have this crazy fucked up life. Like, I don't need that in a movie as well. And so I feel like that's like, I can't even blame people for that. I get it. But to me, that ambiguity with his work is the most beautiful thing. Like, you could be pissed off about the ending of Twin Peaks: The Return, but I love it. I love it because it's like, an ellipsis at the end. It's not a period. It's not an exclamation point. It's an ellipsis. And I love that because most things just explain themselves too explicitly, I think. And for me personally, this is just my personal thinking. The ending that are ambiguous, for whether series or films or whatever, are those that stick with me. Those are the ones that I remember. The Shining, just as an example, those are the ones because it's like, wow, what was that about? And it's something that I'll always think about when everything is wrapped up really neatly. It's just like, okay, great, that was a great experience, and I forget it after half an hour. But a lot of people prefer that, and then they can move on with their day and make dinner or whatever, go out and have party. But to me, I think that's the beautiful thing, the ambiguous ending that you'll never be able to figure out, and it always will stick with you. That's the case with me.
Well, I think moving into final thoughts, maybe if we want to start wrapping up our conversation on Inland Empire, maybe we can go around and just get some final words on the film. I definitely think, again, weird position to be in on your first viewing. This is one where, like, I definitely agree that on multiple viewings, I could see this rise for me. I also could see it drop, but I assume it'd probably rise. There's a lot here to love. I think specifically the filmmaking, I really appreciate. Again, I just think the viewing experience for this, for me, is so daunting, though. That I don't really see a world where, like, this is not one after this conversation where I'm like, oh, maybe I'll just rewatch it tonight. I'm sure in a few years I'll be tempted again as I'm going through Lynch's filmography to be like, yeah, maybe I'll give it another shot. And I'm sure as the years go on, I'll probably appreciate this more and more, I think. On a first viewing, though, definitely a unique film. This is definitely like watching this, being well aware that, like, okay, tomorrow I'm recording a podcast on it. Definitely was one of the more unique features we've covered on the podcast, and I'm happy we were able to hold this space. Nick, what are your final thoughts on the Inland Empire?
I love how much this movie has grown on me over the years. I think that makes it even more special than other films in Lynch's filmography that I just instantly connected with. There's something that always manages to make me feel good about the art that I'm making, the films that I'm making. I'm currently like finishing sound mixing of a short film, very big short film that I shot in August, and just listening to this film and watching it and being like, I can't. It's so artificial, like all those moments where it's clearly either ADR or like adding the footsteps in pose that don't fully match up, like all those little things that only if you're actually focusing on it you catch on. Otherwise it just like blends into the entire atmosphere and vibe of the piece. And I think it's that DIY, handmade, handcrafted energy to it that I absolutely love. I will always be there. Like if someone says I want to make a movie and they go out and make like by themselves, like I'm gonna do camera, producing, almost acting to a point, like something like this, I just think it's even more commendable than people that go out and manage to get like 200,000 euros or whatever and just kind of like throw it away on generic project that's like people talking in a room about nothing, and it's cleanly shot, but it's like in heart. I think this is a film full of heart, and it makes me emotional. That's like the best thing I can say about it. Like after multiple viewings, it gets to that ending. I said it's just like, oh man, the feels are there. Like it's now it's working, and that's lovely. And I cannot imagine how I'll feel about this movie like 10, 20 years from now, like when we do a marathon of David Lynch's works on ClapperCast 2029 or 2045 or something. We will see if anything has changed, but yeah, love it.
Jack, what are your final thoughts?
I have an appreciation for this a little bit more listening to two people who like love this. I think again that sort of camaraderie is infectious, and I think having a differing opinion and listening to it, I think it's opened my eyes a little bit more. I still think this has issues. I still think it's far too long. I think it's a little bit too surreal for its own good. I think narratively, I think those vignettes are just a little bit too. They have a lack of flow and a rhythm to me. It's very difficult to indulge this feature on a first-time viewing. I purposely not wanted to watch this for at least 10 years because for me it's like it's always been the one where I probably built up a lot of anticipation, and it's ironically exactly what I thought it would be, both like positive and negative. It's sad talking about this in a way being Lynch's like last big thing, and it actually being like the last thing he did was a rather big, elongated, epic in a way. I can't see myself wanting to watch this again for the foreseeable future. The one environment where I would love to watch this I'd love to see it in a cinema. I'd love to be there and just in the pitch black for 3 hours and have this take over me. And I think that's my opinion would probably differ. I think the Blu-ray that I've got didn't really particularly help watching it during the day. And a 3 hour viewing is like really tough to watch during my week as well. I'd love to have seen this 35mm, which is shocking, but it is what it is. I would love to see this in a cinema. If I ever get the chance for someone to do like a screening of it or just a marathon of Lynch movies, I'll definitely go watch this if I'm able to, just to experience the gulf of it where it's so demanded to be seen. I don't hate this. I don't love it. I admire this, and I also have slight disdain for it. Knowing the context of the situation, talking about Lynch as well, it's really sort of broadened my horizon about what the idea was for this, what it could have been, what it actually is, what it may be. It's a really interesting discussion. I agree with with Ivan and Nick. I think this will grow into something. Ironically, it's 20 years old, but I still think it'd be the one last thing where Lynch's works have all had a prominent amount of due diligence to them all. Even Dune with the Denis Villeneuve, that's one for the fans. Yeah. I think even that's had, even though that film is utter tripe, I think, and even the TV cut of it's horrific. I think there's been some sort of reevaluation of watching like Lynch just try do something in space opera. This to me, I still don't think we've had that gulf to it. I think Nick's probably right where I think there's been a lot more revisionism to this in a way, but I think it's still on the cusp of it. I think it's 2 more years, at least another year, and I think for its 20th anniversary when it starts building up to it, I think there'll be a little bit more of a big push. I'd love to see just something more come out of it. I was going to say earlier when this premiered at the film festival, it was actually 3:17. So he cut off 17 minutes for its theatrical. I'd love to know what those are, considering you said there's 70 minutes of footage. I'd love to know it. Someone was like, "Yeah, let's get rid of this," and he was like, "No, let's keep that and get rid of that." Like that to me is staggering. Although again, I'd love to see this in a cinema, but it was such a pleasure to talk about this. It's the last little bastion of Lynch, bar I think the straight story for me, which I've purposely wanted to leave last to fall on some common ground. But it was so fun to talk about, and what a wonderful indictment of the of audiences repelling this and going to the MCU. So yeah, I'm
Wouldn't
excited. Yeah.
wouldn't be ClapperCast without it. You will love the straight story, by the way. Can't wait for you to finally watch
Oh no,
that.
I don't think that's got a good 4K release. Studio Canal in England did all of his big hits a few years ago. Really rare to find Blu-ray DVD combos. Like honestly, like the transfers are amazing. But he hasn't transferred to the Criterion yet in the UK, I don't think, which is a shame.
Tragic. Finally,
Indeed.
Ivan, our guest today, what are your final thoughts on Inland Empire?
You know, I think whatever you feel about this movie is correct. And I feel like, you can connect with the artwork, just like what I was thinking about the drawing, the paintings today. It's like, if you don't want to rewatch it, I get it. Listen, I'm never gonna blame anyone, even Lynch fans who don't connect with Inland Empire. But to me, like Nicolò was saying, it's so inspirational. It's just that you can do this, take this shittiest camera and create something so artistic and so compelling and so, interesting to discuss. Maybe even some would say maybe more interesting to discuss than even to watch, the experience of watching. But to me, the film is so funny because you watch it for an hour and you're like, oh yeah, I get it. Oh sure, of course. It's the movie, the identities are bleeding, sure. And then she goes through the door, and the next thing you know, you completely lose track of the film. She loses track of herself. She seems to be in the world of the film or whatever kind of world she's in. But to me, there is this line that one of the girls say to her, in the future, you'll be dreaming, a kind of sleep. And when you wake up, someone familiar will be there. So to me, from that point on, this could be a sort of reference to this kind of mysterious process of acting, of creating a character that you cannot put into words, that you cannot discuss, that is something that you feel your way through. And in the end, she's someone familiar. To me, I think that could be either a reference to the last scene of the film where she's sitting on the couch and all the characters from the world of the film are suddenly around her in real life. But it could be that. It could be the moment where she dies and then she's reborn as Nikki and the director is there. He's that familiar thing. So you could look at it as this kind of the mystery of acting, which is an art form, I think, that a lot of people don't appreciate just how difficult it is. And to be that open, to be that vulnerable, to be in the moment, it's a really great art. And I think Laura Dern certainly pulls it off in this movie. And kudos to her. She's amazing. I adore her. And I just want to end with one thing about this film. Mulholland Drive, the last word in Mulholland Drive is silencio. The last word in Inland Empire is power. And I think that's where I should end it.
Beautiful. With that, you can obviously find Inland Empire if you want to watch it, which I think I would recommend just as an experience. I mean, I think everyone should at least give this one go. I think it's widely available at home. I know if you're in the US, it's available on the Criterion channel, so go check that out. Let's get to our question of the week. I think we all agree Laura Dern is an absolute highlight of this film. So we're asking, what is your favorite Laura Dern performance? Nick, take it away. What is your favorite Laura Dern work?
Definitely Star Wars Episode 8. No, I'm joking. Inland Empire came super close, I have to say, absolutely. But I was looking through her filmography, and there's one movie, a TV movie from 2018, directed by Jennifer Fox, kind of flew under the radar. I don't know, I don't think it's ever been mentioned since, which pains me. But The Tale from 2018 absolutely floored me. That was around the same time when I was going through Lynch's filmography as well, so I was kind of like high on the Laura Dern hype train, like rewatching Wild at Heart and Blue Velvet. And here she is magnificent. Just the movie itself with coming after the beginning of the Me Too era and tackling those issues of not just abuse but also childhood abuse and childhood trauma, to have a movie feel this personal to the director and this confrontational, having her, the fictional character at least that Laura Dern plays, be this vulnerable throughout, trying to keep this strong facade, and then it's slowly crumbling as the movie goes along. Outstanding, outstanding. I think it's probably like if someone told me, like, I don't know who she is, what should I watch? I wouldn't be more like towards like the Jurassic Park or even the Lynch films. I would say watch The Tale, because it just shows you her immense range, and it's also just a great film in its own right. Shame it's not been talked about much. I've not done my. I should have pushed it more over the years, I guess. It just kind of came and went, but yeah. Curious to hear others' picks.
Ivan, what is your favorite Laura Dern performance?
Well, I'm gonna have to say Inland Empire, and I was thinking, since it's like, okay, we've talked so much about it, but The Tale would have been my choice. So thanks for stealing that, Nick. But no, that is a great
You're
film.
welcome.
That is a great performance, and it's an autobiographical story, and it is a tough watch. Certainly deals with child sexual abuse, but the last two scenes, her performance is just, it's overwhelmingly emotional. It's so beautiful, and um it just shows what she can do. I mean, I just love Laura Dern. I mean, I cannot not love her, but I will pick Inland Empire because she was in a strange place in her career. She was in a bit of a lull in her career this period because she did this Ellen Coming Out episode in 1997. She was playing a lesbian that Ellen comes out to in a very public way. And there was a lot of backlash against her when this happened. She talked about this several times. There was a bomb threat on the set. She lost roles over it. After that, a lot of people didn't want to hire her. It was she had to hire security detail for the first time in her life at that time. Like, this is over Ellen's Coming Out episode, and so she was a bit. She also had kids, so it was a bit of a lull in her career. And when she started Inland Empire, it was just kind of this fun project with her friend Dave. And, she's doing this, the monologue woman, let's call her, because I'm not really sure who she is. That Susan Blue? Is that some kind of version of Susan Blue? But she recorded this whole thing in one take. I think they stopped twice. Once was for an airplane flying by, and once was just to change the tapes. But she did this all. She memorized all this dialogue. There's a lot that was cut out, and she did it all in one take. I mean, this is how amazing this woman is. And to me, I think I'm very happy that she won an Oscar for Marriage Story. I don't think that's one of her better performances, but that's often the case. I'm just glad she won. But to me, this is her crowning achievement because how many characters does she even play? I don't think that anybody knows. And there is these moments in this film. I'm sorry, I have to go on because I love Laura Dern so much, but she does have these big scenes, big moments. But to me, like, some of the things that really stand out the most is when she's softly crying or surrounded by those girls when they're talking about presumably her love interest Billy, and they're about sleeping with him, and she's just softly crying, not saying anything. Or there's that scene as a monologue woman where she's talking about her son dying and how time stopped for her, how she felt like she was in a dark theater. Like, those moments resonate so much with me in these kind of quiet, soft moments. So yeah, sure, there's these moments where she's terrifying and where she's really upsetting and where she's really big. But those kind of small moments to me are just like pure gold. And this is why this has to be my favorite performance of hers. But I will also say to those who are not so familiar with Laura Dern, you could check out Smooth Talk as one of her first films. You can see how magnetic she was even back then, before she had this experience. Or you can check Citizen Ruth, where she's playing a character unlike anything else she's ever played, and she's really unlikable and kind of this. I don't want to call her like she's a kind of an unsympathetic character, but she pulls it off so well, and she's so funny. You can see just how funny she is. So those are some things that are maybe not as well known, that I think would be worth checking out for people who are interested in Laura Dern.
Jack, what is your favorite Laura Dern performance or performances?
I must admit, there's very little I've actually seen of Laura Dern. Looking at a filmography, which is actually quite frightening. I will say, and I mentioned it before. I was going to say Jurassic Park, but I think that I don't. I think that I don't really think that's fair. The one I'll say is Wild at Heart. I think she's incredible in that. I think she's the epitome of sexiness in that as well. I think she gives out this performance where it's just unregulated. Like, it's what like Ivan said about like, being present. Like in Wild at Heart, like whoa, like I don't think there's any idea concept of a film there. It's just like her and Nicolas Cage are just going for it. Whatever that scene is, they're just going for it. And I think it's elevated the mundane there. She keeps her own in, so like she's like very visual in that film as well. But every time he goes up to 11, she's not so far behind him, and I think she really does make a really interesting character there. And again, she's iconography wise, I think she's drop dead gorgeous as well. I think she still is. I think she's especially with a lot of people in Hollywood. It's very murky. I think she's genuinely been breathtaking ever since she sort of has been like when she was like 18, 19. She's probably in her 50s now, I'd say. Is that right? She might be even in the 60s. She looks absolutely incredible. She feels like she hasn't aged. But in Wild at Heart, she's just absolutely brilliant. But there's other stuff as well. She's good in like scene stealing stuff. Like she's good in The Master and stuff. But she's Wild at Heart. God, she's. I remember watching that not long before or Lost Highway and being like wow, wow. And then obviously Jurassic Park Dominion. But other than that, it's pretty good. That was a joke, by the way. She's really good in The Master. She's really good in Wild at Heart. But she's also good at Blue Velvet as well. Like, but I think she's just incredible at Wild at Heart. A feature I think where like you look at them two and you think, yeah, he's going to take over. I know I mentioned like she's not fab, but she's her screen presence, her charisma, like he's unable to like in Raising Arizona, like he takes over that film. Like Vampire's Kiss, he takes over. I'm referencing Nigel Cage, Nicolas Cage. My wife calls him Nigel Cage, but like she is there every time. She's never lost. I think it takes a really good creative force to never be left behind on screen. And I love that she's his muse as well. I love that she's David Lynch's muse. Also, Naomi Watts is, but Laura Dern's the OG. Yeah, really good stuff.
I mean, you guys pretty much stole my picks. I think she is phenomenal in Wild at Heart and The Tale both. The Tale's like just raw, pure emotion. Wild at Heart is like, I think, such an underrated Lynch masterpiece. Freudian slip there. Dune is also a lost gem of his career. But she has, I mean, a lot of great performances. She's wonderful in Little Women. I mean, just like a heartbeat of that film. Jurassic Park, obviously, she's iconic in that film. That was my Halloween costume this year. I'll also mention she's good in Wild. The Sun, I think, is a completely just such underrated film, but I think she's also just really great in it. So she's had a really strong career. But my two would be the ones you mentioned with The Tale and Wild at Heart for sure. I guess to be different, I'll just say Little Women because I love that film so much. With that said, let's go to our rapid reviews. Anything we've seen recently that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I will go very quickly because this month I am checking out Tom Cruise movies I've never seen before. Mixed bag for sure. Just watched The Color of Money, which until like after I finished it, did not realize it was a sequel to a film. So like if that was really important, sorry, missed that one. Martin Scorsese film here. I think Paul Newman's good here, really good here. Tom Cruise is interesting because there's like two sides to his performance. When he has to be this cocky young guy, like he thrives. It's the role he was born to play at this time. When he has to be more down to earth and quiet and emotional, really struggles here. He just does not have those layers yet. But I thought the film overall was fine. I watched Oblivion because I want to say I really like that director, but I'm starting to get more and more unsure. I thought this was like terrible to sit through, just a boring, like not good sci-fi film. Some good iconography, but not typically great. Tropic Thunder, hated. Not shocking for Carson Timar, but
Stop!
hated Tropic
Stop.
Thunder. What, just not funny, not good in most really any way.
Gen Z.
So sorry, everyone. And then Risky Business was fun. I don't know if it was necessarily groundbreaking, but like for what it was, I appreciated it. So definitely a mixed bag for Tom Cruise. I'm excited to see some more of his features that I haven't seen yet, but an interesting 4. Nick, what have you seen recently?
I've been super busy with just like work, the short film, coming back home for the holidays here in Italy from Berlin. So I haven't been watching much. The only thing I've really been watching, honestly, is On Cinema at the Cinema. That's become my comfort show to watch web series. Team Heidecker. I watched the trial of Team Heidecker, which is the giant culmination of like 9 seasons of the show and 5 seasons of a spin-off show. It's like crazy. It's fun. Honestly, I want to recommend books. I've been reading a lot more recently because of that. I finally fell in love with James Joyce. I get him now. I read The Dubliners, and that was very emotional and very just beautifully simple and in its mundanity and portrayal of everyday life and people from the lower class of society and children to older people and the high class, and just the final moments of this are magical. I started reading Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man very recently. So yeah, that's one recommendation I would give. I've also been reading this book, which kind of ties into the short film that I've been making recently, but just the title itself was very catchy. By Darian Leader, it's called "Is It Ever Just Sex?" which already is like, okay, interesting. And it is this psychoanalysis of just intimacy, physical intimacy. We recently talked about this on the reboot of my own podcast, formerly known as Death Adaptation, now called Anatomy of an Adaptation. Talking with the good Carson here about Queer by Guadagnino and William S. Burroughs. And this book gets into those very intricate parts of humanity, of what it means to be a human being and a sexual being in this world, and what physical desire, carnal desire truly means. So, highly recommend those books. And yeah, I wish I had been watching more things outside of David Lynch.
Hey, I mean, you could be watching a lot worse stuff if you're just watching some David Lynch.
True that.
Jack, what have you seen recently?
This is not going to be as long as you think it is. Usually it's like fucking nine hours long. I'm just going to do the big hitters. I've just finished my Hooptober. I'm starting to November, but like Nick said, I've just been fucking so busy with work. I've not really had a chance. So I'm going to do some big hitters here. I've seen. I have a 16mm print of Nosferatu that I watched the other day. It was fucking incredible. Just not just prep for Eggers film, just because I wanted to watch it for Hooptober as well. Really impressive. Um, I'm going to upset a few people here. I watched Joker 2, and as time has gone by, I really like it. I think it's really interesting what he was trying to do there. If he was a far more sophisticated filmmaker, it'd be so obvious that he was trying to sort of pair these two films together and showcase morality and just have these elevated themes or thematics, but he's just not able to do that because I don't think Phillips is able to sort of take it to that next level. But I thought it was a really interesting feature about the first one, which we watched in Venice, Nick, about giving the audience that accessibility to be that brutal, and then expecting them to want to have it again, and then taking it all away from them, and to see the audiences like just outright reject it because he won't give them what they want, which is unadulterated, undiluted, absolute horrific misogyny and violence. I think it's such an interesting conversation to have, and what audiences are prepared to sit through. And it's how he does it with the musical, the one I'm not too keen on. But other than that, I think it's interesting. I watched The Apprentice, probably like the worst time to do it. I think Sebastian Stan's very, very good in it, but for at the time, the current climate, it's a feature that I just don't think anyone needs. Make the fucking documentary. Make sure people can see the reality and things like that now. I think trying to make a film like that and say it's non-fiction within a cinematic lens is really dangerous, especially with the output that people have got with audiences. I watched the Reagan film by Dennis Quaid. Don't know why. I thought it was atrocious. I'll move on straight away. I watched Jason Reitman's Saturday Night. I thought that was atrocious as well. I thought, what a fucking waste of time. What a waste of a cast. In 5-6 years' time, some of those are going to be like headlining their own comedies. They're all going to be doing something. But from watching it in there, I couldn't tell you one person who comes out of that, aside from Cooper Hoffman, who comes out without literally a lick of shit on them. Everyone was just so boring. Stop. I just thought it was horrible. I watched Transformers 1, which I thought was fine. I watched The Critic, Ian McKellen, which has had like a radical edit from when it was premiered, I think at Telluride or TIFF. I thought that was good. It just wasn't insipid enough for me. I like those films to be dark and gruesome. What else? What else? I'm going to mention this because I wasn't going to earlier. I really like Smile, the Parker Finn movie. I was really, really excited to watch the sequel. Found some time to go watch it at the cinema. I thought it was dreadful. I was so disappointed. There's two good scenes there: the opening and the sequence where they have like the exorcism with the dance. I thought really well done, but it's the same shit as the first film. I think it just doesn't take any risks. Yeah, I think the ending becomes predictable. I think the whole last act is really anticlimactic. It takes away from the person and goes to like the expense of the person and goes on big on scope, and I really think it really fails. I watched some good Hooktober stuff. I watched some Boris Karloff with Body Snatcher, which was good. The Mark of the Vampire, Todd Browning. I really like Azrael. Is it Azrael? Azrael? The Samara Weaving thing. People have been shitting on that. I really like that. If you want to get 28 Days Later fix, watch that. One of the Dead. I like Jarlo, the Dario Argento movie that Nick loves. I thought that was really good. That's it, really. I watched Supernatural. I watched Romero's The Amusement Park, which I thought was very good. It was fucking haunting to watch that. That's a very weird film because that's about elder abuse, but like through the lens of George A. Romero, that George A. Romero, and that's a very difficult film to watch. But yeah, that's it, really. I'm trying to watch Gladiator 2, but I haven't had the time. My boy Riddler. And Venom. I'll be watching Venom soon, the third one. But yeah, that's all I've been watching.
You're already behind. You have to now catch up with Kraven the Hunter also. You're so behind on the Sony Spider-Man universe. Come on.
Stop. I'll wait for your review of that, and then I'll go from there.
Ivan, what have you seen recently?
You know, I don't think I've not nearly kept up with the new movies as much as I would like to. I talked to Nick about that the other day on Blue Sky. You know, I did watch Conclave, which I thought was great. Especially like Isabella Rossellini. Yeah, maybe I'm biased, Blue Velvet and all that, but in just like 4 minutes, she leaves such an imprint in not so much even what she says, but what she doesn't say. And I was very impressed with that. So I did find that movie. It was kind of a thriller, really. And then I would even predict that it might win the Oscar for Best Picture. I would not be surprised at all if that turns out to be the winner. I've been watching this TV show called From, which I don't know if you guys have heard about. It's kind of this like a mystery show. It's kind of, it seems like a horror show about these monsters who come out at night in this place that nobody, you know, people get trapped there, nobody can leave, and but it's really more of a drama, and it's I find it quite interesting and intriguing. I just finished season 1, and it was just renewed for season 4 now. And my only concern, talk about what we talked about, ambiguity earlier, that they will reveal too much about this place, or that it would just keep going on and on and on. I think that can be a problem with these kind of mystery shows. So I hope they don't reveal too much. I hope they do leave a lot of things open. The main character, the main actor is Harold Perrineau, who completely stole Romeo and Juliet from Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes back in the 90s. And he's also great here. He's always great. It's a pleasure to see him. And so that's something I've been watching and I've really been intrigued with lately. I know it's kind of a very generic title, but I do recommend the show. I think it's very interesting. The Substance, like I mentioned, has left a great effect on me. I knew it was going to be gross. I knew it was going to be over the top, but I didn't expect that it was going to be so funny and so poignant at the same time. And Demi Moore just completely impressed me. I always kind of underestimated her, I think, throughout the 90s. And she was just, there's a scene in which she's getting ready to go out on a date, and I don't want to reveal too much, but it's heartbreaking and it's beautiful, and she really put her heart into it. And I do hope she, as much as Oscars are important anyway, but I do hope she gets nominated, because I do think she deserves it. And so that left a great effect on me. I thought it was really a beautiful movie. So those, I've been rewatching a lot of Lynch and a lot of other stuff, but I think that was the one that this year left the greatest effect on me.
It's so nice after Lynch disrespected Rossellini and Blue Velvet and just ruined her career and shit on it, that she was able to bounce back like this. Kidding, of course. That sounds great. So with that said, guys, it's the last episode of the year. So I will say happy holidays to everyone at home and on the call. Thank you so much for joining us for a year of ClapperCast that I really enjoyed. We'll be back in the new year. We already discussed Eggers on this podcast, but we will be reviewing our first episode back will be Nosferatu. So very excited about that. We also have The Wolfman coming out in January. So those should be really fun to check out before we get into my birthday season, where I'm going to make you guys watch Carson Cinema. So we'll see if that's a good or bad thing. If you enjoyed us talking about Lynch, you can go to our Patreon if you missed it. Our bonus episode for December was a review of Lost Highway. Myself, Nick, and Randy Burrows of the Uncut Gems podcast reviewed that film, so highly recommend you check that out. If you just want more Lynch discussion, Uncut Gems did a whole Lynch marathon where they reviewed like everything Lynch has done, including Twin Peaks. They went season by season and gave reviews. Nick, I believe you were on most, if not all those episodes.
I hosted it.
You hosted it even. So I would highly recommend you at home, if you're like, oh, I want to hear people talk about Lynch more, go check out those projects. And with that said, that is going to do it for us today. Where can we find everyone on social media? Ivan?
If I could just say, just give me a moment. I want to say something to end on a personal note. The work of David Lynch has connected me with people from all over the world, literally from Brazil to Japan and Italy, of course. And it's been a source of lifelong inspiration and creativity for me. And that's something I'll forever be grateful for. And I just want to thank you guys for inviting me. I had such a great time talking to you and hearing all of your opinions. And you can find me on Blue Sky. I'm only on Blue Sky nowadays. My username is UnderTheFan119. Now, if that means something to you, then you should probably follow me. And if it doesn't mean anything to you, then you definitely don't want to follow me.
Nick, where can we find you on social media?
Oh, you can find me on Blue Sky and Instagram at NikiGra97, also on Letterboxd Nicolò Grasso, or YouTube and Vimeo, where you can watch my short films and videos at Enjoy the Movies. And also, now officially, the return of Anatomy of an Adaptation, first episode with Carson talking about queer, is now available on Spotify. Go follow us on Instagram at Anatomy of Adaptation Pod to stay tuned for all of the upcoming episodes next year.
Jack?
I don't know if we're even on social media anymore, to be fair. You can find me on Letterboxd, and I suppose you can find me on Twitter. Although there's like a mass exodus on there with the username at Jak-Luke Sharp. You can find me my writings on Clapper. I've got 3 features that I've got to publish by the end of the year. I promise myself. So you can find some reviews there. I'm going to try doing my Gladiator 2 review when I watch it ASAP, but you can find me there. I also just want to say I love this show. I haven't been on here for 6 weeks, but Cass invites me every week to see if I'm available. I always appreciate your time. You know I love you to pieces. But I generally think it's been one of my favourite years doing this. Like I've genuinely loved your programming. Has been absolutely outstanding. You've not let the side down whatsoever. So thank you very much for putting the time and effort in. I love this show. I will be on here anytime you ask me to. I genuinely love it. I have to be up at 5:30 for work tomorrow, and this means the world to me anyway. I would still do it for you. So thank you very much for having me on. It's a pleasure to meet Ivan. I love the Lynch enthusiasm. It's infectious to me. It's infectious. I'll watch the Straight Story when I can. Nick, it's always a pleasure to see you as well. The Italian of the group. And I'm glad that Death by Adaption's having a second wind. Fabulous news. But again, thank you very much for having me on. Thank you for indulging me. It's always a pleasure. And to watch Inland Empire for the first time, well, thank you very much, Carson.
I'll put it this way. I would never want my first viewing of Inland Empire to be for any other reason than this. This is the best case scenario for me watching the movie. So I appreciate you all being here also. You can find me on Blue Sky and Letterboxd, just Carson Timar. Again, thank you so much for supporting the show this year. Happy holidays. Happy David Lynch December. That is behind us now, and we can look forward to an entire new year. Fun episodes, new releases, classic reviews, all that good jazz. So with that, we'll see you next year. Goodbye.